Hi, welcome to the Chris Baker podcast here on NebraskaSunriseNews.com. You need to subscribe because we got a ton of great content for you. And let's just get into it right now. Obviously, the Mike Groene party machine is still going on, and now politics is starting to, ramp up, right? So just to recap, Senator Groene was taking pictures of his a girl working for him. He was perving out. He was a moron for doing it. So now he is admitted to what he was doing and now stepped down. So enter the body politic because they are now screeching for a Nebraska state control investigation of Mike Groene's laptop from hell. We now can say Mike Groene's laptop from hell. Is that hysterical or what? Anyway, so Senator Megan Hunt and others, they want to have a full investigation. Well, I don't know. I'm not a seasoned investigator. In fact, I'm really not even a raw investigator. But it seems like this is pretty open and shut. Mike Groene took pictures. He admitted to it. He resigned. It's over. Look at that. I just did the state's investigation and saved them thousands and thousands of dollars. So there you go. Another example. What you don't think you think there's something else there? I can tell you, since Nebraska Sunrise News broke that story, there's really nothing else there. Mike Groene was perving out and admitted to it. Resigned. It's over. It's over, Johnny. It's over. But, the body politic has to get involved. And this is because people get elected to office, and I don't think they really know what they're supposed to do. I think that getting elected to many people in a public office is 90% of the job. And then the actual legislating and governance and all that stuff, well, that's just really inconvenient. Right? Like, let me give you a great example. We now know that Vladimir Putin has moved into a couple of areas in Ukraine, right? I get it. You get it. We're not stupid. So here we go with another politician yes, I know. Another politician shows you just how bad they are. See if you pick up on this. Here he is, the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Defending freedom will have cost for us as well, and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours. We're closely.
Yeah, targeted that. First of all, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, right? So he comes out and says that there's going to be pain, right? First of all, he uses the term we. This guy ain't going to hurt at all, okay? These guys like Joe Biden, they're not going to hurt at all. But what he's talking about is this Ukraine insanity is going to raise inflation. It's going to raise energy prices. And in fact, what he doesn't bring up is that we have cut down on our domestic energy production, and we're making up for what we no longer produce by getting energy from, guess who? Russia. See? So I don't know how these people can do this, but here's the other thing that he did. What he did was he gave a permanent excuse now for his failures. Okay, so for the first year that this guy's been in office, energy prices have gone up, inflation has gone up, everything's insane. Business-wise, the man's been a disaster. But he didn't have anyone to really blame. He couldn't really blame Trump because the numbers were in. So what does he have now? Putin. Well, you can blame Putin. See, it's those Russians. If they wouldn't have gone into Ukraine and we had to have these sanctions, we wouldn't be having all this pain right now. That's a big pile of hooey, what he just said. And now what he has done is put forth a permanent excuse for his failed policies. And just mark my words, I know these people. Like I know Rush's Naked Body. You Rush Limbaugh fans know what that was right there. Anyway, so Joe Biden getting involved in Ukraine, I don't think this guy really knows what he's doing. But I do know a guy who knows a lot about the Ukraine. He's a national security expert and retired CIA station chief. Scott Erlanger joins us here on the Chris Baker Radio Show. Good afternoon, Scott.
Hello there, Chris. Great to be back.
Well, it's great to talk to you again here. This is probably the third or fourth show that I've had that the great Scott Erlanger has joined us. But, you know, Scott, I got to ask, are we where you thought we would be with Joe Biden versus Vladimir Putin at this point?
Actually, we kind of are. There was a point a couple of months ago where I was writing some outlines as to like a kind of a novel I was going to write about, like basically set in the year like 2023. And in the novel, I was going to have a member of the Pennsylvania. I can actually show you this to verify this for you. In 2023, there was going to be a Pennsylvania member of the Pennsylvania National Guard sitting in a trench line on the Donbass, wondering like, why the hell am I here? So unfortunately, yeah, I tend to be, all modesty aside, I tend to be pretty prescient with all of this stuff, whether it's Iran, Russia, predicting what's coming versus a lot of the denial of reality that we see in the Biden administration or the Obama administration. Because remember, the initial invasion of Ukraine and the seizure of the Crimea was under Obama's watch. And the only quiet time we've known since 2014 in that area of the world, the relative quiet time was during Trump's administration. And now we're back to the same old again.
And people talk about that a lot. And Scott Erlanger, of course, you're fluent in Russian. You're an expert on what's going on over there. Why do you think that this didn't happen under Trump? Well, I mean, what was it about Trump? And I think I know the answer, but what is it about?
I'll put it in some personal terms. So I found the most effective tactic in dealing with Russians is you treat them with respect. Even if you're ticked off at them, even if you hate them, you treat them with respect, because that's the thing that is very important to Russians, respect. They have an inferiority complex. You treat them with respect. At the same time, you can be a hard ass if that's what you want to be. And in fact, they'll respect that. But in other words, you smile at them as you're like putting a knife in their back, so to speak, a little bit. But they can understand that because that's the way they are themselves. But they are not the kind of people who you treat them like trash, because now they're really going to loathe you, because they want respect, right? Putin wants respect. And by treating him with disrespect, you're going to incite more problems, especially if you're not willing to follow up your disrespect with actual brute force, because it's clear that Biden is not. And so, you know, Putin is an intelligence officer. He's a Russian intelligence officer. I understand the way he thinks as an intelligence officer. And a lot of this stuff, you can figure out what the guy's going to do. I mean, you can buy, I have on my bookshelf over here on my right, several books on Putin. One is an entire book that is dedicated to an interview with Putin, everything about the guy, how he was raised as a child on up. Now, something like that, despite the fact it's not classified information, is immensely valuable because it allows you to look into this guy's soul and see how he's going to act, or at least somewhat predictive. And so, you know, the Biden administration has done everything wrong when it comes to dealing with the Russians. And then they sit and wonder why they have a problem. And this is why Trump had it right. Trump treated Putin with respect. At the same time, he was curtailing Russian energy exports by trying to make Western Europe more energy independent. That's a knife to the heart of the Russians. But he was doing it with a smile on his face, Trump was. And that is the way to deal with Russians. But our liberal press, being the ignoramuses that they are, all they see is him being nice to the Russians. They don't see that, no, see, he's actually reducing Western European dependence on Russian oil. He's arming the Ukrainians. He was Putin's worst nightmare. as opposed to this president, which from the beginning, Putin was, I've got this guy's number. He was a weak sister as vice president. Now he's president, and now I'm going to run roughshod over all of them.
Scott Erlinger's our guest, retired CIA station chief. He's a real spy guy. And Scott, what do you think Vladimir Putin's goals are here, both in the long term and the short term? What do you think his objective is?
The question, what are Putin's long-term and short-term goals? And so I'll speak to that. The short and medium-term goals are a little bit easier to understand. And that is, Putin is using Ukraine partly as a tool against the West. There is a legitimate reason for, we'll get into that later, about Ukraine is tied to Russia. That's part of the issue. The other part, though, is that Putin can use the Ukraine crisis as a tool to achieve goals in other foreign policy areas. Maybe those foreign policy areas are things like nuclear weapons being stationed in the eastern part of NATO near Russia, and other things such as that. However, the long-term goals are harder to divine. Now, there is some people I've been agreeing with on the past have been taking a much more dim view of Putin lately, and that is in reference to his latest speech. Now, I did go through his latest speech, but I need to read it again more thoroughly. And basically, at this point, Putin is almost 70 years old. He has a big picture of Peter the Great in his main office. And every day he's looking at that saying, okay, I want to be remembered as a modern Peter the Great. I helped Russia return to strength. I helped Russia continue as a great country. And so that becomes a little frightening because as he gets older, he may be interested in really upending things to achieve these goals. Now, there are some people, including Russian American experts I know, who are seriously worried that Putin's goal is to ultimately take over all of the Ukraine and to reinstitute another form of the Soviet Union. Belarus is certainly on his side now, was giving him some trouble 10 years ago. Now they're just a client state. And perhaps his goal is ultimately to have Ukraine in the same position. It's hard for me to see that right now, but I'm starting to think that that is more of a possibility, because if you look at this guy's speech, he is literally talking about things that happened in the year 1640. This 15, 20-minute speech is a history lesson on the Ukraine and Russia. And I thought I knew my Russian history well, and I do. But this thing, he gets into the weeds because he is basically saying, Russia is an aggrieved nation. Everyone has used the Ukraine against the even though Kiev is basically the home of the Slavic people. Russia has been a victim of many other countries which have used the Ukrainians against Russia. And actually, he actually calls the Ukraine, he calls it an anti-Moscow Russia. That's what he calls the Ukraine, because he says that the other powers like German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he's going way back, wanted to create an anti-Moscow Russia that would offset Russia. And so I'm not saying this is correct, but this is the way the man sees the problem. And that is pretty troubling, because it doesn't seem like there's going to be anything that you're going to be able to do to dissuade him from trying to achieve these goals. Then maybe he's looking at long-term perspective. I don't expect, unlike what the Biden administration has said, I don't expect you're going to see tanks roll into Kiev. The moment that the Biden administration said that, I said, no, I think that's utterly ridiculous. I said, what you could see is like a remilitarization of the Donbass. And that is exactly what happened. You weren't going to see, Russian armored divisions come from Belarus and capture Kiev, 50 miles in from the Belarusian border. You weren't going to see that ever. But I think what his medium-term strategy will be is to just slowly weaken Ukraine, sap its will to resist, constantly cyber attacks, use Russian clandestine forces and disinformation to basically destroy Ukrainian civil society. And eventually somebody will be elected who will be more pro-Russian. And then they can look at what the next step will be.
So you figure they go for these two provinces, these so-called breakaway provinces now, and
That's
then
right.
slowly apply the pressure and then hopefully find a friendlier government down the road.
Right. I think you'll so what you'll see now is despite the talk of invasion and all these things, I think what you'll actually see in the next couple months is actually a slight reduction in tensions. There will be a little less activity. But then at a time of his choosing, Putin will start ratcheting up the pressure again to try to get something else that he wants. And of course, because he's not going to do a lot after this, because they need Russian forces, which by the way have been covertly in the Donbass region since 2014. The
Mhm.
separatist movement would not exist were it not for Putin. Okay. It's Russian money, Russian weapons, and Russian support that have kept those places on a lifeline because they really couldn't survive economically on their own. Okay. So he's got that going. But with the recognition that came out yesterday, now he can overtly support those groups. Now he can overtly, with big stickers, the Russian army can roll in. So in this way, it's not a war. It's more like a half war. Half the war was fought in 2014 when the breakaway provinces, quote unquote, declared their independence. Now we're seeing, okay, an overt occupation of what we knew was what we, meaning the West and Russia, we all knew that those provinces were basically gone, and now they're just they're just closing the door on that. Yeah, now they're officially gone. Now, if Ukraine wants to liberate those provinces, now they'll be head to head with the Russian army, with air support, with Russian air support, as opposed to a bunch of Russian supported separatists. So this has changed things.
We're talking about Scott Erlinger. Scott, a retired CIA station chief. He's a national intelligence expert, especially when it comes to the Russians. Of course, I, grew up during the Cold War. So you don't see this really turning into what they would say is a hot war. What I was kind of concerned about, and I don't know if it applies
Right.
now, is that when the United States is sending military gear, weapons, things like that, do you see a point when the Ukrainians would be using that, or do you think that the Ukrainians will just let them have the breakaway provinces and maybe complain about it, but just
Now
that's
that's a very good question, Chris, because the answer is I don't really know that answer. The I was talking offline actually yesterday to a think tank guy in Moscow. He was an excellent English speaker on a break on Arabic TV yesterday. I was talking to the Russian, and because everything he said he was observing on the TV show was correct. I couldn't say that the guy was a liar or he was wrong. Everything he was saying was correct, and he was trying to explain Putin's thinking, and I can't disagree with that. Putin may be wrong, but this is the way he thinks. So the Russians said that in conversations with some Ukrainians who he knows, their actual feeling was they would never admit this was sort of relief. Like, in other words, those provinces aren't half gone anymore. Now they're completely gone, and we can get on with our lives. So, so in other words, that's a possibility that the Ukrainian government will use this, will use this to drum up support from NATO, and they'll probably get it. But at the same time, this maybe takes a load off their shoulders. They don't have to worry about regaining a bunch of coal-rich provinces in the east that were always going to be trouble because they're mostly ethnic Russians there as opposed to Ukrainians. So in other words, maybe they can just kind of let that go. But of course, there's the other fear that if I just let that go, maybe he'll want even more and he'll try to take another bite out of us.
right.
Maybe, maybe not. But so arming and assisting Ukrainians could be a dual-edged sword because at the same time as maybe NATO is arming the Ukrainians and continuing to assist them, we have to be very careful and maybe counsel like that the Ukrainians shouldn't try to like lash out and try to seize those provinces back because then you could have World War III. You have Ukrainian troops killing Russian army troops. That's a big difference than killing a bunch of quote separatists, which
Right.
always gave Putin a deniability.
And my concern is if we're arming them and they're doing that, I think that makes us a lot more vulnerable than our political class understands. And I
That's
explain
right.
it that way, that if my kid was killed by a Russian-made missile because, they gave it to some separatist, I'd want a piece of them
Right.
because they
That's
supply
right.
weapons.
That's right. And that's why, and
Oh,
a lot of this stuff is that somebody, Jesse Kelly, put on Twitter. He tweeted something about the problem with the Biden administration is that they have a lot of people in the government who have no people skills. They're a bunch of nerds who just know like
yeah.
history and culture and stuff. And I was like, no, actually, it's worse than that. They have a bunch of nerds in charge who don't have people skills and also don't know the culture and history because they don't know this stuff.
Yeah,
How many people over there are advising properly on, the history between Russia and Ukraine?
hey, Scott, I got to hit that question again because we lost audio,
Okay.
and I apologize.
Okay.
So I'm just going to ask that question quickly
Go
again
ahead.
and go through that answer. That's a really important answer for me. All right, here we go in 3, 2, 1. Scott, with the Americans arming the Ukrainians, if fighting were to break out, what I'm concerned about is the repercussions of Americans arming Ukraine and then American weapons used to kill Russian soldiers. I don't think we can just take that for granted that, oh, well, they won't be mad at us. I mean, I would be mad.
Right. That's right. That's a very good question because ultimately we don't understand exactly what the Ukrainian government is going to do based on what happened yesterday. Now, some sources tell me within the Ukrainian government that there's actually a feeling of relief that some Ukrainian officials are relieved because now that those places are recognized by Russia, they're totally gone now. Unlike before when they were kind of half gone. Now they're totally gone and they can be kind of written off on the accounting book and Ukraine can get along with its business. So maybe the Ukrainians won't do anything. But at the same time, maybe they will try to strike back and get those provinces because maybe they'll say, if we just let them go, then he's going to take another chunk out of us. See, so what I'm saying is, right, we don't know what the Ukrainians are going to do. We can try to advise them and tell them. But at the same time, when we're giving them weapons, we have to be careful that they're not going to use them in a way that could draw the United States further into this. I think a very important thing to remember with all of this stuff is that there are no good choices here. It's between a bad choice and a worse choice. And so, well, people might ask, well, why is that, Scott? Why and Chris? Why are they just bad and worse choices? And the reason is, and this is something not a lot of people are talking about, is because the United States, and more particularly Western Europe, made certain decisions a dozen years ago that sealed their fate. Germany and Europe decided 12 years ago, ignoring the elephant in the room, that they would start making themselves dependent on Russian natural gas. And they knew the history of Putin, and they knew that Russia always uses energy as a blackmail tool. But they chose to ignore that, probably because too many people in the German government, et cetera, were getting a lot of money from the Russians to make sure these pipelines happen. So these people disregarded their own national interests long term and basically sold those countries to the Russians. And so now Putin has a feeling that he can kind of control Europe because he has something over them that he didn't have 20 years ago. And so that has emboldened Putin to try to do things that he would never have considered 20 years ago because of these decisions that were made 12 and 15 years ago. We have to live with the consequences now. So now the Europeans and Americans are stuck trying to put the toothpaste back into the tube. And it's not going to work totally. And we just have we have bad solutions and worse solutions. And all because of poor decisions. Now,
Scott Erlinger is our guest here on the Chris Baker podcast. Scott, you bring that up, and I was doing some research. I do remember during the early stages of the Trump administration, when the president was pressuring NATO and the EU to stop taking energy from Russia and get it from us and I remember Trump saying, we're spending a fortune to protect you from these guys, yet you're making yourself dependent on these guys. And
Exactly.
it causes me to ask you two questions. Um, First of all, Putin could cut off the heat, right? Italy gets 46% of their natural gas. Germany gets 49% of their natural gas. Poland 40%. France 20%. They can't afford to get in a fight with the Russians. So that causes me to ask the question: is NATO even available to, or is it possible for NATO to respond to any Russian aggression? Because I seem to remember that when Trump started holding NATO accountable for their spending levels, uh, their militaries looked like they were broken, and they really had to be dragged kicking and screaming to fulfill their NATO agreements. And I know this is a long way to get here, but in your opinion, Scott, can NATO even really respond to Russian aggression?
That was a lot of great observations in there, Chris. Everything you said was right. Trump was 1000% correct. This is another reason why I liked him as president, because he was literally doing things that I knew had to be done 20 years ago, reminding the Germans that they've got to pay their NATO bills, warning them about their energy dependence on Russia, and trying to set up alternatives like American exports of natural gas to Eastern Europe. And the problem is, though, is that now we're stuck with we're stuck with 12 years of really bad policy decisions in Europe, mostly. Some in the United States, but mostly in Europe. And so how effective is NATO? Now, the Germans are making a brave stance temporarily, I might add, I think, by saying that they're going to close down Nord Stream 2. But but let's see what happens 3 or 4 months down the line. As a colleague stated to me, a guy who's out of Moscow, a Russian, he said, well, if you're an Italian sitting in Milan, maybe a factory owner, and you have 4 hours of natural gas a day because Europe is sanctioning Russia based on the Ukrainian crisis, you're going to be pretty ticked off, because you'll be saying, I can't operate my factory, my house is cold, and all because of Donbass, a region I've never even heard of. I'm cold in the winter. And unfortunately, this is the bed that the Europeans have made for themselves. Now, they can work to reverse it somewhat. Germany was planning on getting rid of, like, literally all of it. It's going to take a long time to do.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time.
They don't know.
Scott, last question, and I appreciate your time. Scott Erlanger, former CIA station chief, national security expert. Where does China fit into all this? There's a lot of people asking, okay, if Putin moves on the Ukraine, then the Chinese will move on Taiwan. Just in your opinion, where do the Chinese rank in all this, and what do you think they're doing?
That's actually an excellent question. It hasn't really been brought up, but I've thought about that. And the answer is, like, China is emerging more and more as Russia's go-to partner in these things. They're only united in the fact that they're both kind of anti-West. As I'm saying this, make no mistake that as we speak, each of those countries has medium-range nuclear missiles pointed at one another. Make no mistake about that. They continue to be on guard against espionage from the other side, and they have nukes pointed at each other. However, they are friends of opportunity right now, and that should not be underestimated. All the sanctions that the EU and the United States will place on Russia will be partly offset by China, because they've already negotiated, Russia and China. They don't use US dollars to purchase things from one another anymore. They use their own currencies. The same way that Iranian sanctions against Iran are less effective, because China has come in to Iran's rescue economically this past year. So these guys will continue to support one another. And what will China learn from this response will be interesting. I really don't know, but it's possible that they will be emboldened by what they're seeing, and they think that the West is distracted. It's time to hit up Taiwan. That's possible. On the other hand, the Chinese tend to be a little more risk averse than the Russians, and they may see our kind of belated attempt at sanctions as something that they have to be careful of, and so they may decide to bide their time. It's really hard to tell right now. But also remember, in China, Xi, the dictator of China, there's a Communist Party Congress coming up, and he does not have full control over China. There are lots of powers that be within China that are very resentful of him trying to set himself up as another Chairman Mao. So it's not a done deal yet as far as, they are a formidable foe, and they're the ones I fear much more than the Russians. Russians can make trouble, but in the end, their economy is only the size of Italy's. China is much more to be respected and to feel threatened by, I think. So we need to watch what's going on there very carefully, and we need to work together as we are with countries like Australia, India, and Japan to try to create almost like a an Eastern version of NATO as a way of trying to check Chinese aggression, to use deterrent in the South China Sea with naval patrols and such.
Yeah, well, what a time. What a time. Scott Erlinger, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the Chris Baker program. So this Ukraine, whatever's going on there, there's no good outcome here, one way or the other. It's going to affect us economically. Are they going to drag us into a stupid war halfway around the world? Which, I don't know if you're paying attention, Russia's got nukes, okay? They can hit us regardless. We have weird people in charge, weird people who suddenly take over a debate on any given topic. And in a sane world, they capture these people with a butterfly net and put a straitjacket on them, all right? In fact, let me give you an example of this. Meat. You like meat? I like steaks. I like chicken. I like ribs. I like fish. I like to eat meat. But never in my life did I ever think that I was supposed to eat meat because I'm a white guy and I want to be in charge. You want to see some delusion when it comes to meat? Check this out.
The assumption that the best protein comes from corpses is a racist belief. How do you know the animal would have picked you to feed off their corpse? 21st century animal eating requires our complicity in a new colonialism. These events especially affect girls and young women. Your hamburger comes with a dose of misogyny. Popular culture is flooded with references to sexy cows, sexy pigs, sexy chickens, sexy fishes, who all just want to have fun. Meat eating is also one of the ways gender-based structures of oppression are perpetuated. Masculinity, a construct of the gender binary facing constant destabilization, feels always under threat, and eating animals is its protection racket. White supremacists weaponized it, eating meat, eggs, and dairy, and the baiting of liberal men as so-called soy boys are all part of the neo-Nazi messaging. To say you care about animals is considered a sign of weakness in a world still committed to the gender binary.
Unbelievable.
Meat eaters like anti-abortionists have forgotten that one quality of non-existence is not having awareness about existence. When all else fails, meat eaters assert that animals are not our equals. I heard all your laughter. I know some of these must be new ideas, or you think they're fringe or whatever. Our whiteness is part of the problem of meat eating.
Our whiteness is part of the problem with meat eating. Meat eating. Yes, these people. How do they get in these positions? Like, here's a great example in Omaha. On Thursday night, the Omaha School Board, what a collection of unaccomplished people, by the way. They're going to debate on whether or not to lift the mask mandate for schools, right? So we already had our public health official, whatever, Grand Poobah, Douglas County, Ginger, whatever. She lifts this mask mandate. Now, the Omaha School Board, none of them that I know of have any medical training whatsoever. They've decided we need to keep the mandate. But this Thursday, they're going to decide whether or not it can be voluntary, you see. Now, here's my question. What are they basing this decision on in the first place? Okay, so you had your government-approved medical professional who said, all right, we're lifting the mask mandate. But apparently the oligarchs at the Omaha School Board, well, we don't know, none of us have any medical training whatsoever. So we'll let you know about the mask mandate. What we have here is people who have too much power. It's like it's gone to their head. They forget that they have a job and they're just obsessed with their title, their power. At least that's how I look at it. In fact, let me give you a great example of how insane these people are. As we all know, there's been big protests in Canada. Justin Trudeau, that trust fund baby, he now has issued a state of emergency for Canada and given himself dictatorial powers. He's in charge of everything. He even is going to tell people where they can spend their money, or even if they can spend their money. They're bringing in that social credit score. Watch. And I don't think this guy intends on getting rid of his power anytime soon. I don't think he's going to let it go anytime soon. He likes it. But just look at the people who are making a decision and just see the rationale they use. Here's some lady member of parliament just spewing insanity.
How many guns need to be seized? How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
Honk, honk, honk is an acronym for Hail Hitler. This idiot can't even get it right? She wants to smear people as being Nazis, and she can't even get the reference right. Hail Hitler. This is insane. But what's going on in Canada, we need to pay very close attention to it, because I don't think I'm alone when I say I think there are many Democrats that are quite jealous with the power Justin Trudeau has snatched from the Canadian people. Now, a lot of people believe that our law enforcement professionals will not follow the government's orders when it comes to oppressing us. Well, that debate is getting a little more cloudy. Joining us right now, a guy who's been in that debate for many years. He's a U.S. Army Green Beret, a police officer. He's a man of arms. Joining us right now from 88 Tactical, Trevor Thrasher.
Afternoon, Chris. Thanks for having me on again.
I really appreciate your time today. And first of all, I just want to get your thoughts on what you've seen coming out of Canada.
Well, it's kind of a big mess right now. I think the Canadian people are finally learning the price to pay for letting their country be ever increasingly taken over by tyrants, and by pushing their country ever leftward bit by bit. This is where they are right now, to the point where you can be essentially arrested for free speech. There is essentially no free speech in Canada right now. And they're being, law enforcement, unfortunately, is being wedged between a tyrannical government and the decent people of Canada. And it's really, from my perspective, is a no-win for law enforcement. It's a no-win situation. And but the people have allowed that to happen over time. This didn't happen overnight. There have been decades of creep, and now the police are in a vice right now, and so are the people.
Trevor, one of the things I've wondered is, how do you end this, or how do you get out of this? It would seem to me that the government of Canada is not going to be looked upon too favorably with the populace.
Well, traditionally, the way through this for democratic, or at least on their face, democratic countries, the way to handle this is through the ballot box, through elections. If you really absolutely don't like what's being done to you by the politicians, the general recourse is the next election cycle. Or if you're very motivated, you can get things done before the next election cycle. But they're kind of stuck in a bad position right now.
From the law enforcement perspective, for years, there's always been this debate. Well, if government comes after our guns, I don't think a lot of policemen are going to back them up. And I know that the laws are different in Canada. Canada doesn't have the Bill of Rights like we have a Bill of Rights. But I did want to talk to you about this just from this perspective of in America, what kind of choices does law enforcement have in a situation like this? And the reason I bring it up is because I remember from my military service, I was never obligated to follow an illegal order. But I'm also coming at this from a layman's perspective. This is your profession as a man of arms. Is are officers and soldiers in that, predicament? Are they just kind of tough? You got to go and follow your orders. I mean, how does this work?
Well, I think unfortunately, people's fears are correct to a degree. It's just in our human nature. If we're in a profession like law enforcement and we're given orders to execute things, as long as it's a more of a subtle creep as far as the violation of rights, there's going to be probably too many officers, especially with some agencies more than others, who are going to be willing to follow those orders, even though in their hearts they know, hey, this might not be right, but with their job and their families and their livelihood at stake, there is going to be a tendency for officers to obey those orders, even if they might creep into what is unlawful. Now, that's a big gray area between what is lawful and unlawful as far as their orders. And there are some things, obviously, that officers can do. Obviously, you're not required to follow an unlawful or unconstitutional order. And in fact, there are laws on the books in many jurisdictions, and even in Nebraska, it's starting to come up, where departments must have a policy in place, basically where officers are required to intervene in unlawful conduct by other officers. Now, this is something it's interesting because these type of laws are pushed really forcefully by the left. But at the same time, these very laws may be something that officers more on the right are going to use to their advantage. So when the time comes, they have the ability and they have the background to refuse these lawful orders that are unenforceable, essentially. And what they do is they ask the officers to take an illegal act that may jeopardize them criminally and civilly. So they do have that right, but it is a very slippery slope. It is a big gray area. There's a bunch of risk on both sides. And if there are other mechanisms to resolve the issue short of disobeying the order, definitely officers should be encouraged to seek those other methods.
The thing I'm thinking of is that in the moment itself, if an officer is given an order that he believes is an illegal order, he can't just say, well, this is an illegal order, I'm not going to follow it, because obviously his superior would, I'm going to guess, reply with, I'm your superior, I'm telling you to do that, hop to it. This obviously would be something that would have to be litigated somewhere down the road.
Well, they're actually required to not follow that order if they know that it's unlawful and unconstitutional. They're required to intervene and stop that if they are capable of it. And the other big question is, it something that they must immediately disobey, or have they sought other methods to try and diffuse the situation and work around it? Because it does come down to, well, you're fired, basically. But there are some protections also. There are whistleblower protections and other things like that an officer can seek. But I will say that the little bit of research I've done in this, it is all over the board legally. And like I said, it's basically a minefield for law enforcement to walk into this. So on one hand, I understand officers, hey, I'm keeping my job. I can do the easy thing and follow orders and claim a little bit of ignorance, or I could do the really, really terribly life-changing, hard thing and say, no, I'm not going to follow that order. I know in discussions between some of my fellow officers or close friends of mine, we've had behind the curtain discussions where we've seen some things, even in the US, where, like, honestly, at a certain point in time, we're willing to say, you know what, officer, we're going to arrest you if you keep trying to do what you're trying to do, because that's unlawful. And you just using that as an excuse that you're following orders doesn't work. It goes back to the whole guard in a Nazi camp analogy. And there are things that, obviously I've risked my life for my country. I'm certainly going to risk my job and a little bit of jail time for my country.
I don't want to open a whole can of worms here, but I'm just curious, as this COVID insanity has continued, as we've now seen things spin out of control in Canada, has this been a topic of conversation, to your knowledge, in law enforcement?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even early on when you saw things in California, for example, when they went out and arrested a guy who was surfing in the ocean because he violated some ordinance or something of that nature, as well as some things domestically. I mean, even when I was working in law enforcement full time, there were things that we were allowed to do that I thought to myself, like, man, that just doesn't seem right. Like early on, if we took your cell phone, we could go through your entire cell phone. The way that the case law was written. And there were things like we could put tracking devices on people's cars without a warrant. And those things existed for a long time. And I always question those as a law enforcement officer. I'm like, hey, I'm an American first. This law enforcement thing that's more than just a job. I mean, it's a duty and it's a calling and a profession. But at a certain point in time, you've got to understand you are working for the people and you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, not to your supervisor.
Our guest is Trevor Thrasher. Trevor, of course, great friend of the show from 88 Tactical, police officer, U.S. Army Green Beret, a man of arms, as they say. And, Trevor, I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'll ask it anyway because you can handle this. As you watch things slow down in Canada, for example, today, Prime Minister Trudeau has said he wants to keep his emergency powers for a while, because they've heard rumors that the truckers may come back and there may be this kind of protest somewhere else. But the key here is that he wants to keep those emergency powers. So from your experience, traveling around the world as a man of arms, is there a window of time where a leader, if he hasn't pulled back those emergency powers, that maybe people ought to start getting nervous?
Yeah, the second he says something like that is the moment you should be very, very nervous. Oh, I'm going to hold on to these powers a little while longer because of something that could plausibly happen. There is always a plausible threat. The primary way to control human beings is basically through fear and hope. And when he has fear on his side, like he does right now, and he claims that he's just going to take those duties a little further and hold on to those powers a little longer, should cause immediate concern. Those are last ditch tools that we allow our government to use. And I can tell you right now, if he says something like that, he's planning very much on exceeding his authority and the proper use of those authorities.
Yeah, that's just very dangerous to me when it comes back to, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, it comes back to due process. With a lot of these COVID restrictions, many people, including myself, have asked, well, how do we know this is going to work? And how do you know when it works? And we've never really been given a clear line. So when you have a leader that says, yeah, I'm going to hang on to these powers because something might happen, yeah, that makes me really nervous.
Yeah, it sounds like something a third world dictator would say. Government generally doesn't give back powers that they've once seized, especially when it comes to individuals involved in government and higher positions. They tend to want to hold on to their power as long as they can and increase it. And it's kind of a human nature thing. That's why you have to have a small federal government, why our forefathers were smart enough and great enough students of history to understand that you have to limit the powers of the federal government, because any power you give the government, they will attempt to draw more and more power. And once they get it, they will not give it up. So it's just a matter of incrementalism until your freedoms are gone. And you see things like right now in Canada, of course, a case probably over a decade where an author was basically put on trial because he produced a book that the Canadian government didn't like, because they felt it was like disparaging against Muslims, because he talked about Muslim demographics in Europe and how Muslims were, just by demographics, were ultimately going to take over Europe. You see cases like in Finland right now, where there are people getting put on trial where they can do 2 years in jail for saying things that may be upsetting to certain groups. And then, of course, you have in Canada, where basically these truckers are automatically being labeled as Nazis and white supremacists. And that's what the leftists always do. They try to dehumanize you and label you so it makes it easier to hate you. Plus, they leverage that fear. They leverage fear and hate to motivate people. And like, it's okay if you do it against them. And then eventually they're doing it against you. And that's what the Canadian people are finding right now.
Oh, boy. All right. Trevor Thrasher, once again, thank you so much for joining us here on the Chris Baker podcast video. I don't even know what to call this, Trevor. What should I call this? It's a podcast. video cast.
Screencast. Just you know what? Just call it your show because that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. The Chris Baker Show. Trevor Thrasher, thanks a lot, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, Chris. Thank you.
All right, now we make fun of moonbats on the big show occasionally, but I think sometimes you can stumble on to very honest moonbats, and I believe that's what we have here. What could be the most honest moonbat position on gender. I don't know why I think this is so stinking funny, but I think this is stinking funny.
As someone who has coined my own xenogender, I find it really funny when transphobes use the argument of like, well, you're just making stuff up. Like, yes, I am. And I'm having more fun than you are. Like, I'm sorry to break it to you, Chad. Gender is made up. Words are made up. Pronouns are just words that we made up. You might as well choose or make words that better suit your personal experience. So, like, yeah, synthogender is a made-up term. I would know. I made it up.
I don't know why I love that. That video is either the most brutally honest moonbat or a hysterically funny guy. And I don't know what part I like the best. The part where he says, yes, I am making things up and I'm having more fun than you. Or at the end, yes, this is made up. I know, because I made it up. I think that's hysterical. What a crazy, cracked up world we live in. Hey, go to NebraskaSunriseNews.com. Get yourself a subscription. We're a great news service. We got a lot of great things going on. There's more shows coming to NebraskaSunriseNews.com. Anyway, I'm Chris Baker. We'll see you tomorrow.